I always believed that the walls of our office in Manhattan carried a silent rhythm. The steady hum of air conditioning, the muffled clatter of keyboards, the faint laughter drifting from someone's cubicle. It was a rhythm I'd grown used to, a background symphony that meant stability. But stability, as I learned, can fracture quietly. Sometimes the cracks appear so subtly that you don't notice until the whole foundation is ready to collapse. I had been working at the consulting firm for 7 years. 7 years of early mornings, late nights, and constant pressure to deliver numbers that didn't just look good but changed the game. Promotions were scarce, trust was rarer, and everyone, no matter how polished their smile, wanted the same thing: power. Still, I thought I had allies. When the email arrived assigning me as lead on a major project, a merger between two mid-sized tech companies, I felt the kind of cautious pride that comes only after years of silent battles. This wasn't just another contract. It was the kind of assignment that could finally put me on the radar for senior management. And right there in the CC line was a name I thought I could count on: Thomas Reed. Thomas had joined the firm 2 years after me. Slick, confident, always with a story about his Ivy League days. Always with a handshake just a little too firm. We weren't friends, not really, but colleagues who had learned to depend on each other's strengths. Or so I believed. The first week was smooth. Long meetings, endless spreadsheets, strategy sessions that bled into the night. I noticed Thomas asking more questions than usual, hovering over my shoulder, making comments about better ways to phrase my presentations. It seemed harmless. Teamwork, I told myself. Besides, I was used to sharing credit. But then came the meeting that made my stomach twist. It was a Tuesday morning. The boardroom smelled of burnt coffee, and the city skyline glowed pale through the tinted windows. I was halfway through presenting our preliminary findings when Thomas suddenly cut in. "Actually," he said smoothly, leaning forward with his hands clasped, "I think what Michael means is that we should position the merger not just as cost-saving, but as a rebranding opportunity. The narrative matters more than the math." I froze. That phrasing, that angle, it wasn't his. It was mine. I had written it down in my notebook just last night, the ink still fresh. The executives nodded, impressed. "Good point, Thomas," one of them said. I forced a smile, though my chest felt tight. It was just one idea, I told myself. Maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe it was an honest overlap. But as the days went on, I began to notice a pattern. My proposals, my phrasing, even the little details I thought only I had noticed, Thomas echoed them. Not in front of me, but in front of the people who mattered. He always framed it as if he were clarifying, polishing, adding value. And each time, the room seemed to tilt in his direction. At night, I sat in my apartment staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversations. Was I imagining it? Was paranoia creeping in after years of competition? My chest ached with the uncertainty, a low hum of anxiety that no amount of whiskey could silence. Then came the first real blow. We had submitted a progress report, a document I'd spent 3 nights perfecting. I was exhausted, barely holding myself upright during the review meeting. That's when the managing director looked directly at me and said, "Michael, this section here, the cost-benefit breakdown, it's sloppy. Not what I'd expect from you." Sloppy? I blinked, confused. That section had been airtight. Numbers checked, formulas verified. But there it was, projected on the screen. Errors. Obvious ones. Misplaced decimal points. Calculations that made no sense. I felt my face burn. Thomas, sitting just across from me, tilted his head slightly, his lips pressed together in what looked like sympathy. But his eyes were calm. Too calm. That night, I dug through the version I had saved on my laptop. My numbers were perfect. The mistakes hadn't been there before. Someone had tampered with the file. And I knew, with a sinking certainty, who it had been. The rhythm of the office was no longer a comfort. The hum of the air conditioning grated on my nerves. The laughter from nearby cubicles felt sharp, mocking. I found myself watching Thomas more closely. The way he hovered by the printer, the way he lingered after meetings, the way he always seemed to know exactly what angle to play. It wasn't just competition anymore. It was betrayal. And betrayal, I realized, doesn't announce itself with a shout. It whispers. It smiles. It shakes your hand and looks you straight in the eye while it steals everything you've worked for. The morning after the report disaster, I walked into the office with my jaw tight and my mind replaying the numbers again and again. My report had been flawless. Someone had changed it. And the only one who had access besides me was Thomas. But how could I prove it? The consulting world isn't built on evidence. It's built on perception. Once the seed of doubt is planted, it grows like a weed. One mistake, one whispered comment, and suddenly you're the guy who needs supervision. I tried to shake it off, tried to drown myself in the next phase of work. I arrived early, left late, double-checked every figure, every slide, every phrase. I stopped leaving drafts on the shared drive. I kept everything on an encrypted folder on my personal laptop. Still, the little slips continued. A chart would mysteriously go missing from a presentation. An email I swore I'd sent somehow didn't reach the client. During a call, Thomas would remind me of a detail I supposedly forgot, but I hadn't forgotten. The detail had been deleted from the file. At first, I thought maybe I was losing it. Maybe exhaustion was catching up. I'd been through long projects before, but this was different. This was targeted. And then, one Thursday night, I caught him. The office was nearly empty, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint clatter of the cleaning crew down the hall. I had gone back to grab my notebook, something I'd left on my desk. As I walked past the glass conference room, I saw the glow of a laptop. Thomas. He was sitting there, alone, scrolling through a document I instantly recognized, my draft for the upcoming client pitch. His fingers flew across the keyboard, deleting, rephrasing, inserting. I froze. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. For a moment, I thought about walking in, confronting him right there. But something in his posture stopped me. The calmness. The precision. He wasn't just borrowing. He was dismantling me piece by piece. I stepped back quietly, retreating before he noticed me. My throat was dry, my hands trembling. So it was true. It wasn't paranoia. He was sabotaging me. The next day, in the pitch meeting, he unveiled my phrasing again, polished just enough to look like his own. He smiled when the executives nodded, soaking in the approval like it was sunlight. I felt invisible. But invisibility turned to humiliation 2 weeks later. We had flown to Chicago for a client workshop. I'd spent the entire night preparing the agenda, making sure every scenario was accounted for. When the morning came, I stood in front of the group, ready to lead. But then Thomas interrupted. Actually, he said, holding up his hand, I took the liberty of restructuring today's agenda. I think this approach will save us time. And with a click, the projector lit up with a slide deck, one I'd never seen before. His slide deck. My outline was gone. Replaced. The clients leaned forward, impressed. The director glanced at me as if I were a fool for not knowing what was happening. And I stood there, my mouth dry, my body rigid, trapped in the role of an assistant to my own work. By the time we returned to New York, the whispers had begun. Michael's slipping. Thomas is really stepping up. Maybe Thomas should be the one leading this. I overheard them in hallways, in elevators, in the cafeteria. Whispers that stabbed deeper than any direct attack. One night, sitting in my apartment with the lights off, I finally broke. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, then another, staring at the city lights outside my window. I thought about the years I had given this firm, the weekends I had missed, the birthdays I hadn't attended, the relationships that had withered because work always came first. And now, it could all be taken away by a man with a perfect smile and a willingness to twist the knife when no one was looking. But beneath the despair, something else began to stir. Anger. I couldn't fight whispers with more whispers. I couldn't just sit there while he dismantled me. If Thomas wanted to play dirty, then I needed to be smarter. I decided that night, I would stop being passive. I would stop waiting for him to make the next move. The betrayal wasn't just an office rivalry anymore. It was war. And wars aren't won by playing fair. The Monday after Chicago, I arrived at the office before sunrise. The city was still waking up, taxis sliding through wet streets, the air heavy with the smell of rain and exhaust. But inside me, there was no calm, only calculation. I had decided, if Thomas wanted to play games, I would stop being the naive one. He thought I was just another overworked consultant, too busy to notice the knife in my back. But I noticed, and I was done pretending not to. The first step was simple: watch. I began documenting everything. Every email I sent, every version of every slide deck, every agenda draft. I stored them on an external drive, time-stamped, backed up twice. I printed copies and slipped them into a folder I kept at home, away from curious eyes. And then I waited. It didn't take long. 2 weeks later, we had a progress call with one of our biggest clients. I had prepared the financial projections myself, checked and rechecked every line. When the client pointed out a glaring error, a number off by nearly $2 million, my stomach sank. But I didn't panic. Not this time. I opened the original file I'd prepared, projected it on the screen for everyone to see. "That's strange," I said calmly. "Here's the version I sent." The number was correct. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Thomas cleared his throat, fumbling for an excuse. Maybe it was a versioning mistake," he muttered. But I saw the flicker in the client's eyes. Doubt. And that was all I needed. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just noted the shift. For the first time, the shadow of suspicion had fallen on Thomas. But I wasn't finished. The second step was to bait him. I began leaving traps, small, deliberate mistakes buried in drafts I knew he couldn't resist tampering with. A misaligned chart axis, a mislabeled column, a reference to the wrong fiscal quarter. Harmless errors, easily fixable, but enough to tempt him into playing editor. And sure enough, he did. Each time, I documented it. Screenshots, file histories, metadata logs. A quiet dossier of his sabotage. Still, I needed more. Something undeniable. That chance came during preparations for the quarterly executive review, the kind of meeting that could make or break careers. I knew Thomas would try to shine, and I knew he would try to do it with my work. So I laid the perfect trap. I created 2 versions of the presentation, the real one, polished and precise, and a second, subtly corrupted version with a devastating error buried deep inside. Not obvious enough to catch at a glance, but catastrophic if presented as fact. Then I made sure the corrupted version was the one Thomas had access to. The night before the review, I stayed late, pretending to work, but really waiting. And right on schedule, Thomas slipped into the conference room, pulled up the file, and started tweaking. He took the bait. The next morning, the boardroom was full. Partners, directors, senior executives, the kind of audience that could end careers with a single raised eyebrow. Thomas stood at the head of the table, his voice smooth, confident, as he clicked through the slides. My slides. I waited, my chest tight, as he reached the corrupted chart. And then it happened. As you can see, the projected margin improvement is expected to be 175%. Silence. A ridiculous number. Impossible. The room shifted. Murmurs. Raised brows. A partner leaned forward. "Excuse me, did you just say 175%? Thomas faltered. His eyes darted to the screen, confusion flickering across his face. "Yes, that's the projection." "No," the partner snapped. "That's absurd. That would mean we're making nearly double our revenue overnight. Where did you get this?" I spoke then, my voice calm, steady. "I believe that's a corrupted draft. The accurate version was circulated last week. Here's the corrected chart." I handed out the printed copies I'd brought. The real version, clean and professional. All eyes turned to Thomas. His face was pale, his mouth opening and closing like a man drowning. The damage was done. The meeting moved on, but the air around him had changed. The same way whispers had once followed me, now they followed him. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the scales tip in my favor. But victories like that don't come without consequences. That night, as I walked to my car in the empty parking garage, I felt a presence behind me. Footsteps echoing. Too close, too deliberate. I turned, and there he was. Thomas. His smile was gone, replaced with something colder, sharper. "You think you're clever," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "You think you can embarrass me and get away with it?" My heart pounded, but I held his gaze. "I don't need to embarrass you, Thomas. You're doing that yourself." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the sound of our breathing. And then he stepped closer, so close I could smell the bitterness of his cologne. "This isn't over," he whispered. And as I drove home, my hands tight on the steering wheel, I knew he was right. It wasn't over. It had only just begun. After the quarterly review disaster, Thomas's mask began to slip. On the surface, he kept up the same charming act, shaking hands, laughing too loud in meetings, dropping corporate buzzwords like confetti. But behind the scenes, his moves became sharper, more desperate, and more personal. At first, it was subtle. My parking spot reassigned without explanation. My access card suddenly deactivated one morning, forcing me to wait in the lobby like a visitor until HR fixed it. Files I'd saved to the shared drive mysteriously disappeared, replaced with blank documents. Coincidences, if you didn't know better. But I knew better. The real breaking point came one Friday evening. I stayed late at the office, finishing a report for a client in Boston. Around 10 p.m., the floor was nearly empty. Just me, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights, and the hum of the cleaning crew somewhere in the distance. When I left, exhausted, I found my car tires slashed in the garage. All four. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, humming like insects. The concrete smelled of gasoline and dust. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the deflated rubber, the knife marks still raw in the rubber. And in the corner of my vision, the shadow of someone moving away, slipping down the stairwell before I could shout. I didn't need to see the face. I already knew. The next morning, I reported it to HR. The woman behind the desk smiled politely, typed into her computer, and assured me they'd look into it. But I knew the truth. They wouldn't do anything. Not against Thomas. He was too well-connected, too charming, too good at playing the part of the rising star. So I stopped expecting anyone else to save me. That weekend, I took measures of my own. I installed a hidden camera in my cubicle, angled perfectly at my desk. I set up email alerts to notify me of any changes to my files. I even started carrying a small voice recorder in my pocket, just in case another confrontation happened. And sure enough, they paid off. Monday morning, I walked into the office and saw my chair slightly moved, my monitor tilted at a different angle. Someone had been there. I checked the camera. There he was. Thomas. Middle of the night. Entering my cubicle with a keycard he wasn't supposed to have. Pulling open drawers, rifling through files, scrolling through my computer. For 15 minutes, he searched. And then he left. I watched the footage 3 times, my stomach twisting tighter each time. It was no longer about career advancement for him. No longer about looking good in front of the partners. This was obsession. And obsessions always end badly. The following week was a blur of paranoia. I felt his eyes on me constantly. In the break room, in the hallway, even in meetings when he sat across the table, pretending to take notes while his smirk burned into me. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of my apartment building, every distant siren, every slam of a door jolted me awake. I started keeping a baseball bat by the side of my bed. And then came the night that changed everything. It was close to midnight when my phone buzzed. An email notification. The subject line, "I know what you did." No sender. Just a blank, anonymous address. The body of the email contained a single attachment. A photo. My apartment door. Taken from the hallway. Taken that night. I froze, staring at the screen, my pulse pounding in my throat. Someone had been outside my apartment, close enough to touch the door. Close enough to hear me breathing on the other side. I checked the peephole. Nothing. But I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with the bat in my hands, the lights on, my eyes locked on the door. By morning, I'd made a decision. This wasn't just corporate sabotage anymore. This was stalking, harassment, maybe worse. I couldn't fight him alone. The next day, I went to the police. I showed them the slashed tires, the anonymous email, the footage from my hidden camera. The officer took notes, nodding, but I could tell from his expression that he didn't believe half of it. Still, he filed a report. And that was enough. Enough to build a record, enough to leave a trail in case things escalated further. And deep down, I knew they would. Because Thomas was unraveling. At work, his temper flared more easily. He snapped at colleagues. He missed deadlines. Clients started to complain about his tone on calls. The golden boy image was cracking, piece by piece. And then, one afternoon, I overheard him in the stairwell. His voice low, angry, into the phone. "No, I don't care. He's not going to ruin me. I'll handle it. You'll see. He won't be around much longer." The words chilled me. This wasn't just office politics anymore. This was war. And as I walked back to my desk, my hands trembling, one thought repeated in my head. If I didn't stop him soon, he was going to destroy me, or worse. By the time autumn came, the office in downtown Chicago didn't feel like an office anymore. It felt like a battleground. The tension was thick, electric. Conversations hushed when I entered the break room. Laughter stopped abruptly when I passed down the hall. People glanced at me with pity or fear. And at the center of it all was Thomas, still playing his role, still charming the ones who didn't see the cracks forming in his perfect mask. But I saw them, every single one. His once pristine suits were now wrinkled, his ties slightly crooked. His eyes carried that manic gleam, the kind that comes from too many sleepless nights. And when he smiled, it no longer reached his eyes. The collapse had begun. One Monday morning, the partners called an emergency meeting. A major client from New York had threatened to pull their account after Thomas had accidentally sent them confidential financials belonging to another company. A disastrous breach of trust. Thomas sat across from me at the long mahogany table, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping a pen so tightly his knuckles turned white. I said it was a system error, he repeated for the third time, his voice rising with each word. But I knew better. It wasn't a system error. It was his carelessness. Or maybe his desperation. After the meeting, he cornered me in the hallway. "You think you've won, don't you?" His voice was low, sharp as a blade. His breath smelled faintly of whiskey, though it was barely noon. "I don't know what you're talking about," I muttered, trying to push past him. But he blocked my way, his hand flat against the wall. "You've been watching me," he hissed. "I can feel it. You think those little tricks of yours, the cameras, the files, make you safe? You're not safe. Not here. Not anywhere." His eyes burned with something I can only describe as hatred. Pure, undiluted hatred. I slipped away, my pulse pounding, my palms sweating. That night, when I returned to my apartment, the door was ajar. I froze. Inside, everything looked normal at first glance. But then I saw it. My desk drawer open, papers scattered, and right in the center of the desk, a single item that didn't belong. A black chess piece. The king. I didn't own a chess set. I stood there for a full minute, the silence of the apartment pressing against my eardrums, my breath shallow. Whoever had been inside, Thomas or someone he'd sent, wanted me to know. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was a message. "You're the king," it said, "and kings are meant to fall." I called the police again, hands trembling as I explained what I'd found. They came, took a report, walked through the apartment. But of course, there was nothing they could do. No fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. When they left, I sat on the couch, the chess piece in my palm, its weight heavier than it should have been. That's when I realized. He was slipping, yes, but a man who's slipping is the most dangerous of all. The next week, the partners finally took action. Thomas was suspended pending an internal investigation. Word spread fast through the office. Whispered conversations by the elevators, hushed gossip in the cafeteria. To everyone else, it looked like justice. Like maybe the nightmare was over. But I knew better. Thomas wasn't done. The night after his suspension, my phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. This time it was a video. Shaky footage of me. Leaving the office, walking to the train station, earbuds in, unaware. Filmed from across the street. The caption read, "TikTok." My chest tightened, and for the first time, I truly felt fear crawl under my skin like ice. He was watching me everywhere, waiting for the moment I'd slip. I started looking over my shoulder constantly. I stopped sleeping altogether. My apartment, once a sanctuary, became a cage. I checked the locks 3, 4, 5 times before bed, then still lay awake, staring at the door, waiting for it to creak open. It was only a matter of time before something broke. And it did. 2 weeks later, in the middle of a rainy Thursday morning, the office erupted into chaos. Someone had hacked into the company's servers, leaking confidential emails and documents online. Trade secrets, contracts, internal disputes, even private conversations between the partners. It was a bloodbath, and buried within the files, plain as day, were dozens of falsified reports, all under my name. The leaks painted me as the culprit, the traitor, the saboteur. By noon, I was summoned to HR. By 2 p.m., I was escorted out of the building, my access revoked, my reputation shattered. I walked into the gray drizzle of the Chicago streets, my whole career collapsing around me. Passers-by hurried under umbrellas, horns blared, the smell of wet asphalt filled the air. But all I could hear was the echo of Thomas's voice in my head. "You're not safe. Not here. Not anywhere." And in that moment, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something much, much darker. The day I was escorted out of the office felt like the end of everything I had worked for. 15 years in the corporate trenches, erased in a single afternoon, drowned by whispers of betrayal that weren't mine. The streets of Chicago blurred past as I stumbled through the rain, my mind spinning. My phone buzzed again. Another message. This one was different. Not a threat. Not a video. Just a single file attachment. When I opened it, my heart dropped into my stomach. It was an internal memo, dated months earlier, signed by Thomas himself. A detailed plan for restructuring the company, complete with a list of employees he considered liabilities. My name was highlighted in red. Next to it, one word: remove. It wasn't just professional rivalry. It wasn't just personal hatred. This had been premeditated. I had been marked for destruction long before I ever suspected. I forwarded the file to myself, then to a lawyer I trusted. My hands shook the entire time. But Thomas wasn't done yet. That night, as I sat in my apartment with the blinds shut tight, a loud knock rattled the door. My chest froze. Through the peephole, I saw him. Thomas. His hair was wet from the rain, his suit disheveled, his eyes wild. He looked less like the polished executive everyone admired, and more like a man unraveling at the seams. "Open the door," he said, his voice muffled but urgent. I didn't move. Another knock. Louder. More desperate. "Open the door. You don't understand what's happening." I backed away, my phone in my hand, ready to call the police. But something in his voice made me pause. It wasn't anger. It wasn't rage. It was fear. Finally, I spoke through the door. "Go home, Thomas." For a moment, there was silence. Then, quietly, he said, "They're after both of us." My stomach dropped. Before I could respond, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Heavy, fast. Thomas turned his head, his eyes wide. Then he bolted. His shoes slapped against the linoleum until the sound disappeared into the stairwell. I stood frozen, the weight of his words sinking in. They're after both of us. Who was they? The next morning, the news hit every major outlet. The company was under federal investigation. Fraud, embezzlement, data manipulation, the list went on. Millions of dollars were unaccounted for. And at the center of the investigation, Thomas. But here's the twist no one saw coming. It wasn't just Thomas. The partners, the ones who had pretended to suspend him, the ones who had acted like they were cleaning house, they were in on it. They had used him as a shield, a distraction, a lightning rod for their crimes. And when Thomas realized he was the fall guy, he panicked. That's why he came to me. That's why he left the chess piece. It wasn't just intimidation, it was a warning. Kings don't fall alone. When the king collapses, the whole board shatters. A week later, the FBI contacted me. They had traced the leaks, the falsified documents, even the fake reports under my name, straight back to Thomas's computer. But they also uncovered something far worse, an entire network of financial fraud that went all the way up to the top. The partners had built the empire on lies, and Thomas, in his arrogance, thought he could outmaneuver them. But when they realized he was a liability, they did to him what he had tried to do to me. They marked him for removal. The last time I saw Thomas was on a cold November morning. He was being led out of his condo in handcuffs, reporters swarming, cameras flashing. His once proud face was pale, gaunt, broken. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at the agents holding his arms. But for a split second, his eyes found mine in the crowd. And I swear, there was no hatred there anymore. No arrogance. No fire. Just emptiness. Like a man who had finally realized the game was never his to win. In the weeks that followed, indictments rained down. The partners, the executives, even mid-level managers who had signed off on the fraud. One by one, they fell. The company collapsed. And me? I was cleared of all charges, my name restored, at least on paper. But the scars ran deeper than any reputation could repair. Every time I walk down a crowded street, I still feel the phantom weight of being watched. Every knock on my door makes my pulse spike. Because here's the truth no one wants to hear. In the corporate world, betrayal isn't personal. It's structural. People don't just stab you in the back out of spite. They do it because the system rewards it. Because survival at the top often means someone else has to fall. And in my case, that someone was supposed to be me. But Thomas underestimated one thing. Kings don't always fall. Sometimes they survive. And when they do, the whole game changes.